Hello and welcome to the Captain's Table. I'm your host, Dawn Deckman Mohler, and today we have Bob Blumenfield as our guest. Council member Bob Blumenfield was elected to the Los Angeles City Council in March 2013 and re-elected twice in 2017 and 2022. He represents the 3rd Council District, which spans the northwest portion of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, including the communities of Canoga Park, Reseda, Tarzana, Winnetka, and Woodland Hills. Bob has a history of public service. From 1989 to 1996, he worked in Washington, D.C. as a staff person for Senator Bill Bradley, Congressman Howard Berman, and as staff designee to the House Budget Committee. He later worked as Director of Government Affairs for the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, and then as District Director to Congressman Berman in the San Fernando Valley. In addition, he has served on numerous nonprofit boards, including the Anti-Defamation League, Children's Express, and the LA League of Conservation Voters. Prior to his election to the City Council, Bob served in the California State Assembly from 2008 to 2013. Working for all of the San Fernando Valley communities he continues to represent. He was the first Democratic freshman assembly member to ever serve as the chair of the Budget Committee. Welcome, Bob Blumenfield.
Thanks. Great to be here.
We're so glad to have you on our show. We've been working on this for a couple of months with your great staff, Miriam and Jake, and I'm so glad to have this opportunity to meet with you and find out a little bit about your beginnings and, goodness, when you started out as a council member in the Los Angeles City Council, and most excited to hear about some of your great projects that you've already completed and some that are coming up in the future. So we're going to take a really quick break right away for our sponsors, and we're going to come back and learn more about how Bob Blumenfield got into the business of being a politician in California. Stand by. Welcome back to the Captain's Table. Our guest today is Bob Blumenfield, and we're so glad to have you here, Bob. So, have you been busy?
Always, yes. One of the benefits and curses of this kind of work is that you are never short of things to do. There's always more to do, but that's part of why I love the work.
Well, you are in my home state of California, and you are in one of my favorite valleys, the San Fernando Valley, that you're representing many cities there. I'd like to hear, goodness, because we're going to cover a lot of ground today, but how did you get into, I guess, politics? Did you have a poli-sci degree? Where did you go to school? How did it all start?
Well, it's a long story. And first I say we like to call the San Fernando Valley the Valley.
The Valley?
The Valley, yes.
Yes.
As if there's no other valley.
There isn't.
That's yes. My involvement in politics, if I really traced it, it probably goes way back to when I was a kid. And I started doing work as a volunteer for a group called Children's Express, which is a syndicated news service dedicated to the child's perspective. And with them, I started attending Democratic and Republican national nominating conventions and interviewing politicians and other leaders around the country. And that I didn't realize that at the time, but it gave me a little bit of a bug for politics. Initially I thought it was a bug for journalism, and I pursued that early in my life. But I've been in and out of politics really my whole life in terms of seeing government as a way to make positive change and being interested in how that happens, and through journalism being sort of interested in the world around me. But really after college, I started more seriously looking at politics. Initially, it was that junction of journalism and politics. I had worked briefly for a documentary filmmaker, Ken Burns, on the Civil War documentary.
Oh my goodness!
I was a grunt at the very lowest level just for a few months, and then I thought I had an opportunity working in D.C. for a series on political leadership with Ted Koppel that never materialized, but I was very excited about it. And at that point in my life, I said, you know what? I don't need this series, which was never going to happen anyway, to study politics. I'm gonna do it on my own. And I started knocking on doors to try to get a job on Capitol Hill. Long story short, but I did a number of things and ended up working for a U.S. senator, for Senator Bill Bradley from New Jersey.
Of course.
And I worked for him for a couple of years, for 89 to 91. Got a real taste sort of how the federal government worked. And got a little campaign experience too. I worked with him on his 1990 campaign. And then I was thinking of leaving Capitol Hill, but a great opportunity came up working for someone I had tremendous respect for, who was Congressman Howard Berman. And so I started in his office as a legislative assistant, and I worked with him for a number of years. He was really an incredible role model and a really just a great policymaker, a great thinker, and he was a mentor to me in so many ways. But I worked on Capitol Hill from on the House side then from 91 to 96 in a variety of capacities, both on the Budget Committee as the budget designee, briefly on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and ultimately as his ledge director. So I got a great rounded experience working on Capitol Hill.
So you mentioned Howard Berman, and I had another guest that I interviewed that had worked with him also and had such high regards for him. And I think she said she had learned really about, activism and really getting involved. It was a different kind of a style of being involved in politics that he mentored in his groups that he worked with. Did you experience that at all with him?
Oh, yeah. As I said, he was a great mentor to me, and I give him a lot of credit for, getting me to where I am now in terms of being able to observe him and work with him on legislative ideas and see how he operates. And he was someone who was very firm in his beliefs, but was able to work across the aisle and work to forge compromises when no one else thought compromises could be forged, and to really make great policy. And he was, I think he will go down in the pantheon of giants on Capitol Hill of folks who really made a huge difference. The number of really major changes that happened because of legislation that he pushed forward, life-changing legislation that he was involved with, that probably a lot of people don't know the history of. I could spend the whole podcast talking about bills I worked on with him.
That we might do that one day.
Yeah. I mean, from the False Claims Act to some of the foreign aid bills, just to all sorts of things that he was, a critical part of, arms control legislation, budget bills that really have helped shape this country in a positive way.
Well, I do love that, and that might be something we can do in the future, but he's obviously done a lot for mentoring successful people like you. So go on a little bit with kind of working with that group and continue on.
Well, you mean sort of my career history, I guess?
Yes,
so I worked with him until 96, and then I had an interest in trying to do something a little creative, a little different. It's the usual pathway that people end up in Los Angeles, right? I wrote a TV show.
Okay. What was it?
It was called The Hill. It never got made. We ended up optioning it and selling it, and it was in 96, and I was interested in leaving Capitol Hill. I loved the work, but I knew that if I continued there, I would probably be there forever.
Right.
And I didn't want to I had some great opportunities to be a lobbyist, but I didn't want to do that. I really had some different interests, and I had been going back and forth with Howard Berman to LA all the time because I had a number of projects that were based in the district.
Uh-huh.
And long story, I mean, I had this interest, and I was working with a friend of mine in LA on a TV show, and we wrote it, and it was about young people who work in Washington and their political and personal lives, or their political issue permeates their personal and professional lives. And anyway, I did that for a little bit.
That would have been a great show, because I think they ended up doing a show at West Wing. I mean, that was a predecessor to maybe that particular show. Well,
funny thing you say that. When we were sort of at the apex of this and had an agent and a production company that bought it, it all came crashing down one day when they said, we'd been fighting for a political show, and they said, well, finally, they finally agreed that a political show could work, but then they had found out that there is a competing show that's about politics that was put together by some big names.
Yeah.
John Wells, Aaron Sorkin, et cetera. And so they were basically going to put my show on the shelf.
Oh my goodness.
So that had a direct impact. I still loved West Wing.
I do too.
And my show was very different than that, but that definitely had a role in sort of putting a stop to that particular path. But I was doing other things at the same time. When I was in LA, I had come and helped with the coordinated campaign for Clinton Gore in the San Fernando Valley in 96.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved to LA, to both do the political work and to pursue the writing work that I was interested in. And then at the same time, I had a history of working with the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. I had worked with them and negotiated a couple of federal bills with them, and their executive director had talked to me and about working for them, and I had was reluctant at first because I was focused on the writing, and I didn't want to be a lobbyist. But he's very persuasive, and he said, "Look, you can be the head of government affairs, and you could help us do a number of different things." And I love the Conservancy and their mission. And
tell me about the projects you worked on with the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, and so the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and its joint powers arm called the Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority.
Okay.
So I was the director of government affairs for the years of 96 to 2000, and I worked with them on a number of things, putting together a park bond measure as well, and that got me interested in Sacramento work because I would go back and forth to Sacramento to help get that measure together, but also helping the organization with its mission, which is to strategically buy back critical open space parcels throughout Southern California to create a network of open space for nature and for wildlife. And the organization, has been very successful in using its powers to purchase, but also using its right of first refusal at original purchase price, which was part of its original charter. That's one of its powers, and basically to run these different parks until they're able to donate the lands to the federal government or state. Long story, but I worked out of Barbara Streisand's old house. She had,
of course you did,
very early in my career. I mean, as I was starting to work for the Conservancy, she had just donated her former residences in Malibu to the Conservancy to create a space both for the Conservancy and for public events and for environmental conventions and that kind of thing.
So this was her older home? I know she lives up in the Malibu area somewhere. Is it no longer? It
was in Paradise Cove area.
Oh, Paradise Cove.
Area. There was actually 5 homes along. It was a cul-de-sac, and she had sort of created this area, this estate area, where she had multiple homes, and each home was a little different. One was made purely out of Art Deco. Another one had been made to called the barn, that was made out of some toy makers helped put it together. A beautiful home, kind of looked like a log cabin. One was the peach house. A number of homes that all created a unified area.
Right.
That was ultimately donated to the Conservancy.
Okay.
But she lived there for many years. So I worked there. An odd place to have your office, but it was certainly a beautiful environment.
Well, Paradise Cove is my favorite place on the planet. Whenever I go back home to Burbank, one of the first things I do is get on the 101, go through the Santa Monica Mountains, and go to Paradise Cove for lunch. Yeah, no,
there's a little restaurant there. It's a beautiful spot.
It is. Well, interesting.
I still like to go there. What's that?
No, I say it's interesting that was your hub. How wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't exactly where the Paradise Cove is. There's a little off street there, but anyway, but that's where the Conservancy had one of its headquarter buildings, and I worked for the Conservancy on a number of different projects of creating new parks, both in the mountains and in the urban environment. We created the Augustus Hawkins Park in the city of LA in South Los Angeles, which is interesting. That sort of comes full circle because that's now owned by, the Conservancy ultimately transferred it to the city of Los Angeles. But that's a whole other, I could tell you a whole lot of crazy stories about park creation and that park in particular and how that was created and really a lot of how the Conservancy is able to strategically put together these major land deals to create the open space that we have in Southern California, because most of Southern California was owned privately and unlike a lot of areas where the private space was carved out of the public space, in Southern California, we often have to carve the public space out of the private space. But we do that through bond measures and purchases and land deals where development is allowed in a certain area, but you set aside other parts of it for open space. But for me, from a career perspective, I learned a lot about negotiating and sort of how you can create value. It's not always a binary choice. Oftentimes the way Conservancy would close a deal is by finding what is that value that's outside of the typical equation. And that value often comes in the form of time. A developer may be willing to set aside a certain amount of open space, but if they can get a faster path to the development that they want, that has a value that can be translated into a public benefit.
I love that you're talking about
green space.
The green space for the public. We're going to have to pause for a really quick break. I actually think one day we could do a segment just on the wonderful parks and the developments that you've been involved in, because I would be very interested in that. We're going to come right back. Please stand by. Welcome back to the Captain's Table. I'm your host, Dawn Deckman Mohler, and we are enjoying hearing Bob Blumenfield tell us stories about his early work that crossed from Washington, D.C. with Howard Berman, who became a mentor, and the work that he had done on the Santa Monica Conservancy organization. And I just mentioned we'd love to talk about a lot of parks down the road. So, kind of continue, Bob, more interested in hearing how this developed into you kind of becoming a council member in Los Angeles.
Sure. Well, from my work with the Conservancy, I actually ended up, Howard Berman factors back into my life in a big way, because after working with the Conservancy and doing some other things on the entertainment industry on the side, but Howard asked me if his district director or district chief of staff was leaving, asked me if I would be interested in working for him again, but in the district office, which is a very different job. And, I think I was ready for a change at that point. And I saw the opportunity as a great way to connect with the community. And so I took him up on that, and I served as his district director or district chief of staff starting in 2000.
Okay.
And out of his San Fernando Valley office, and worked for him again from 2000 to 2008, doing local work, but because I had been his ledge director, really being able to help sew together what happened in the district and what happens in D.C. I did a lot of back and forth, but this time I was based in L.A., going back to D.C., and really trying to help from an administrative perspective, help the team really, both the local team and the Capitol Hill team, function well together. And I got to take on a whole number of exciting projects working with him, from working with tree people to create a big cistern to doing all sorts of local projects, working on Hanson Dam, which is something I had worked on in the D.C. area.
Bob, I got to tell you, you mentioned Hanson Dam, and aren't the photos fabulous back in the olden days when people could water ski in it or take boats in it?
Years ago, it was Holiday Lake. You had those fabulous pictures of people enjoying it, and then it had sort of the natural Tahunga Wash. It silted over,
yes,
and the park itself silted over in that way, and it also become quite a dangerous area in some respects, and gangs kind of took over. And one of Howard Berman's missions was, and which I helped him on quite a bit and was focused on, was to revitalize that area. And he literally changed the Army Corps' mission to get them to do recreation. We built a 14-acre swim lake and a boating lake, the largest swim lake, I think, this side of the Mississippi, and a boating lake that would sort of substitute for what had been Holiday Lake, and started to create a whole new area that now you see Hanson Dam has become this great location where it's not only does it have the swim lake, but a Discovery Cube Museum where actually my wife was the executive director of the first one and helped get that off the ground.
Oh, my goodness.
And you have a number of other exciting things happening at Hanson Dam. But
I did not know any of that. Thank you I'm so glad I asked the question.
Yeah, so Hanson Dam, I was very involved with Hanson Dam really since 91 when I was in the D.C. side of things, and then I got to help on the L.A. side of things when I was working for Howard again. Hanson Dam was a big part of the work, but I did a lot of exciting things with Howard Berman, and really got connected to the community in many ways. I had already been connected with the community. Probably my real connection with the community started in '94 after the earthquake, when I was working with Howard Berman, and I got to know a lot of people in helping them recover from the earthquake. But when I was working with him in the local office, obviously he was very connected to the community. And then when the assembly seat was opening up in '08, the person there was termed out. I decided to run for that seat myself.
Okay.
And long story short, but I was successful in that endeavor. It was a hard-fought campaign, but I succeeded. And
that was in the California State Assembly?
I started a whole new chapter of my life.
That was the California State Assembly?
California State Assembly.
Okay.
I was elected in '08. Myself and Obama were elected at the same time.
Okay.
One of my favorite keepsakes is I have a great door hanger, that basically says, vote for Bob and vote for, Barack. As if we're running as a ticket.
I love that.
We were kind of a ticket at the time. He may not have realized that. It was really my campaign that realized that, but still, I got some great, keepsake door hangers of the two of us running together, him for president and me for state assembly.
That's great.
And fortunately, we both won, carried the day.
What a great celebration.
When I started in the assembly, though, it was a difficult time because we were in a very the state was in a financially precarious moment where we were literally on the brink of insolvency.
Oh.
And as a state, we were in a very bad financial position.
Okay.
And in some ways, maybe I became the first freshman a Democratic freshman in California history to assume the leadership of be the budget chair. But in some ways, it was like the house is on fire, throw the keys to the new guy.
Throw them under the bus.
Yeah, but it actually, I was reluctant at the time to take that on, but it worked out to be a great experience. And that was a big part of my assembly career. I have some great legislation, environmental and other issues that I worked on that I'm very proud of, but I was also proud to have taken the state from probably the one of its lowest financial positions and where we were in major deficit to when I finally left, we were entering surplus.
Was that a means of just being more transparent, more accountable to the constituents? What do you think really made that happen?
Well, I mean, it was really making tough choices.
Okay.
And making some smart choices. I mean, we had to make some brutal cuts,
okay.
But we tried to make the cuts in ways that would not destroy the body, the corpus of the state, but would make the cuts in a way that the state could grow again. Mm-hmm. And to make sure also we instituted some financial measures that would help prevent this from happening in the future. For example, we put in place, a budget stabilization fund that would essentially chop off the peaks and fill in the valleys of the volatile finances of the state. Because the state, much more so than the city and the county, is subject to the highs and lows of the market. Most of the money that comes in for your state revenues, the lion's share of it is coming from income and from capital gains.
Got it.
And so when the country does well, the state does well, and vice versa.
Okay.
So one way to try to stabilize that is to create rainy day funds, essentially, which is what we did, which is in the good days you sock away the money so that in the bad days you can fill in the hole. And a number of other things to try to stabilize our economy. And another sort of big structural thing was we moved a proposition that moved it from having to have a 2/3 vote to a majority vote for budget, because that was a structural problem that was creating great inefficiencies where a small number of people were able to hold up the budget and sort of demand excessive things for their interest versus the overall state interest.
Well, I'm sure.
So we were able to get that measure through and fix that process, as well as make the tough choices that had to be made and were very difficult to make. But the bottom line is that, since I left the assembly and, once we got into surplus, the state has done very well till very recently, where the state is finally seeing, unfortunately seeing some deficit. But really, up until then, after I left, it's been very positive for the state in terms of being able to have surplus and being able to create new programs and do all sorts of great things that the state's been able to do.
Well, I
which
thank
is very
you.
different than
Thank you for your service
in
in that area, because I cannot wait for all of my friends in the Valley to hear this podcast and kind of know, where the turning point came from with your dedication to make some tough choices. And I made a note that, I don't know if it was in 2010, you served after you were on the budget committee as a member of the California Film Commission.
I was a member of the California Film Commission. Obviously I took a special interest in, our hometown industry, and I was appointed as an assembly member to the Film Commission. I was also one of the co-authors to create the tax film credits for the industry, because we, at the time we were losing a lot of business to other states and countries that were subsidizing their industry in various ways. Mm-hmm. We had a great advantage that we had the industrial base here in Los Angeles, but it was very difficult in some ways to compete against these other areas that were, throwing money at production. So we decided to create to fund a tax credit that would help level the playing field to some extent, and has been very successful in bringing that industry back. So I was part on the legislative side of doing that, and then as a film commissioner, I, was involved in implementing that tax credit essentially, and making sure that it was done right, and helping set some of the policy goals. So that was just another aspect of my service that I was able to to be engaged with.
I think that was a very important time because you just growing up in the Valley, and I consider Burbank the Valley, the only Valley. But
Right.
you couldn't go anywhere where you didn't see filming going on. And even today, when you're watching maybe MeTV or some great old shows, whatever that might be, whether it's the Brady Bunch House or just some type of film where you see the San Fernando Mountains. I mean, your mountains. You know when they're at the Lockheed, the Burbank Airport, the old Bob Hope Airport. It's had many names, but yeah, there was a time because of permits, the cost of permits, where film companies were going elsewhere. Even in Oklahoma, they developed tax film credits, and they kind of film here all the time. And New Mexico is popular.
The industry has been poached in so many ways, and we try to do things. We try to do things as a state to bring that back, and then I can also talk to you in the future as a city. I've been involved in a number of efforts to try to ensure that we keep the industry here in Los Angeles as well, because we know it provides good paying jobs, and it's part of the not just the culture and zeitgeist of the region, but it's a major economic force for the region.
I completely agree, and it's become, like you said, the poachers. It's become important for other states too. So we'll have to have another conversation about keeping it back in LA and creating jobs. We're going to come up to another break. I want to leave a little more time in our final segment, Bob, to hear more about your work with the San Fernando Valley and really some of the projects that you are most proud of and some of your upcoming projects. So let's just stand by for a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Captain's Table. I'm your host, Dawn Deckman Mohler, and I am really enjoying talking with Bob Blumenfield about a ton of work that you've done throughout your career, and we're only, I think, halfway through. Bob is a council member for Los Angeles City Council. Let's talk about some of the projects that you're most proud of, ones that you can get in your car and drive around and see. I want to get, at the end of this third segment, I want to get a call to action, people to kind of get out and go dine in certain areas maybe they haven't been to before, and see some of the work that you've done.
Sure. No, happy to tell you all about the great things we're doing. Sort of in the trajectory of my career that we're talking about, we hadn't even gotten to my role as a council member yet, but I'll jump ahead to that, which is in 2013, the council member of the area was termed out, and I decided to run for city council, essentially to go from being a state assembly member to being a city council member, but representing really the same area. The council district, though, is a little bit smaller than the assembly district, but I was fortunate in my case that the council district was wholly contained within the assembly district. So I was fortunate enough to win that seat, and I've been a council member ever since 2013, and I've really focused on a number of things, but in terms of the district, really trying to grow the district in a positive way. And that has meant in some areas where it's an underserved part of the area, really trying to give a helping hand to those areas. And in some areas in my district that were sort of unnatural, growing very quickly, is to get out of the way and figure out how to facilitate that growth in a positive way. And so, we've been very successful in this district of making some real changes, in the side of things where we sort of get out of the way. I'd put that sort of the Woodland Hills area. When I first was elected, it was an area that there was a lot of interest in growing, particularly the Warner Center, which was a small area, but has long in the 1970s and was considered sort of that it would be the downtown of the Valley.
Right. And
I'm very proud that in my first year, we put over the finish line the Warner Center specific plan. It's the same Warner family that it was named after, so you're not completely off.
Okay.
One of the brothers that was involved in Woodland Hills, but ultimately creating the Warner Center. But the Warner Center area in 2013, they had been kicking around the idea of a specific plan of basically a growth model that would have, instead of having to have one environmental impact report for every project, it would have one overall environmental impact report that all the other projects could toggle onto. Long story, I got that over the finish line, made sure it was not only was it a model for growth, but it was the most environmental friendly specific plan in the city.
Good job.
It had gold LEED standards, and the idea was to transform this area, which had been sort of a mecca for driving, and create a live, work, play environment of smaller blocks and growth and investment. It's been 10 years, and we've seen the results of that because it has been growing gangbusters to the fastest growing part of the city. It is the easiest place to develop in the city, bar none. It has seen, we just welcomed the Rams, moved in their headquarters, 2 fields. We've had tremendous amount of housing go up. You know, when the whole city is struggling to find housing, the Warner Center is housing going up every other block.
Oh my gosh.
And, you know, and it's sort of managed smart growth. By having the growth there, it's able to take some of the pressure off the surrounding single-family communities, which is also a positive. But so that's been a very big positive on the Woodland Hills side.
Love that.
And managing the growth, but in many ways figuring out how to get out of the way. And that's been, you know, that's a great example because projects that would normally take years to entitle get entitled in months, weeks or months. So that's why that's grown gangbusters. But throughout the area, I've tried to focus on each part of my district of what does that district need. And in Reseda, you know, Reseda is an amazing area, sort of the center of the valley, has a great history with the arts, but it has been really underinvested in for many years and underserved and lower income. And I figured out how to get some of the former CRA dollars. That could be a whole segment in itself about the saga of the CRA and how the CRA ended ultimately in my involvement in that and on the state side and on the city side. But we created what I call the Reseda Rising Initiative, which is a way to focus more than $100 million worth of investment into Reseda and into areas that would be, you know, create catalytic growth and do so in a way that would be inclusive and, you know, as much as possible, not gentrifying, but including and growing the community with the folks that are living there. And
I like that a lot.
Very successful. In fact, the cornerstone project of that initiative is an ice rink.
Okay.
Why an ice rink?
Yes.
You know, it's an opportunistic thing in the sense that there was a bond measure in the 1990s, Proposition K, that included about $3.9 million for an ice and roller rink. It was used to sell that bond measure. It was written into the measure. The people voted for it. But for years, for decades, no one could figure out how to spend that $3 million to create an ice rink. And I had heard about that, and I was determined to take that money and use it well.
Well,
and
yeah, Burbank has Pickwick,
really...
and Pickwick Ice Rink is still there, and we all grew up going there. People love ice rinks.
And years ago, I mean, you know, the Valley, you know, had the Isoplex and had some skate rinks. But so there was this money there. I went to Rec and Parks to see if they could build me an ice skating rink for that money. And of course, they laughed and said, "Yeah, we could build you a couple ice cubes, but we can't build you a rink." But I didn't want to be deterred, and I knew that money, the $3.9 million, would probably be lost if I couldn't figure out how to spend it on a rink. I approached the LA Kings.
Smart.
I got them to sign off on a partnership. I found some other dollars. I went through every roadblock for this project seemed to have been thrown in front of this project, but we were tenacious on my team in figuring out ways around it. But the bottom line is we are now under construction for a $27 million ice rink, public ice rink, that will be in Reseda on Sherman Way, basically Sherman Way in Etiwanda, on a large parcel of land that had previously been an albatross for the community because it had been an area of crime and trouble. And we are basically transforming that into what will be this catalytic project that's going to bring families and communities together for recreation. It's going to have not only ice skating, but figure skating and free skating and curling and anything you could think of on the ice.
Well, and of course you'll have your hockey teams out there and classes. I'm so proud of you.
The ice rink and the LA Kings are going to be managing it.
Perfect.
And it'll be subsidized for our young people so that everyone in this community will have access to that. And we're already seeing the impact. We're seeing apartment buildings go up because they know that this investment is happening. And you know that once it's up, it'll be surrounded by coffee shops and restaurants and other folks who want to take advantage of all the people coming and going.
If you build it, they will come.
Absolutely. And you know, it itself is a dramatic story of how we got to this place. But the nice thing is we are in this place now where the walls are starting to go up. You're starting to see the form. And this time next year, you and I can be skating on the ice and talking about it. And it's not only an ice rink, but it will have a small roller rink in front of it as well.
Well,
so
I'm putting that on my list. I'm gonna hold you to it because I like to skate, and I'm gonna put that on my list, Bob. What in our final probably about 4 minutes or so, what are some of your pet projects right now? And we'll want to find out how we can follow the great work that you're doing, or how our audience can follow you, be involved.
Yeah, no, and I barely touched the tip of the iceberg in terms of our local projects. We have the Reseda Rising Initiative, which I mentioned, which one of the big portions of that is the rink. Another big part of the Reseda Rising Initiative is the Reseda Theater, which is this iconic old theater that we are revitalizing, keeping the old historic marquee. That is under construction as well. We have the Reseda Boulevard, which we've spent tens of millions of dollars creating a complete street there with everything from bus bump outs to bioswills to bike lanes. We've got the Sherman Way, Great Street. So all this is happening in Reseda. Amazing things happening in Reseda. And our Mural Festival and our Reseda Rising Art Walk, which we just did. So that's all Reseda. Then you go a little, I'm going real fast now. You go a little further east in my district to Canoga Park,
yes,
which has also been a very underserved area. And we have what I've labeled, basically the Canoga Park Arts Hub, where we're leveraging that commitment. And we've taken the Canoga Park Madrid Theater, which has its own fascinating history. At one point in time, it was the Pussycat Lounge. It was destroyed in the earthquake. It was bought by the city and made into a community theater, and it had become a little bit dilapidated. And we've got a $14 million facelift happening right now. That's all, paid for. So you're going to see that theater open. We have the Tosco Theater, which is just up the street, which had been a community theater, the West Valley Playhouse or Cole Porter Theater, but it was going to be lost because the heirs didn't want it anymore, and it would have become a fast food joint or administrative building. We purchased that theater, created an arts incubator,
wow,
as well as a black box theater that will work in conjunction with the Madrid Theater as part of this overall arts initiative in Canoga Park. So you see the revitalization happening there. You also have in Woodland Hills, we've got our reimagined Ventura Boulevard, where we've taken a portion of Woodland Hills that really needed a revitalization and a sense of place. And we,
I think I saw some videos of the reimagined Ventura. I think I saw some type of promotion, and it was just beautiful. And the way the cars are parked, how they can pull in, and
they pull in diagonally, but backwards. The first street parking like that in the city, where you pull in backwards.
Right.
It's a safer way to do it. And that's about halfway through its development. We've created the basics, but the next phase will involve landscaping and other beautifications and concrete work. So there's a lot going on throughout the district. These amazing projects that we've been seeding and creating, as well as and parks. I've always been a big fan of creating new parks. We have our fire station park, where we took an old fire station and turned it into a kids park, a local parklet, as well as the bikeway, which is the LA River, which is this vision. Actually, something has a through line in my life. I was involved back when I was at the Conservancy in the envisioning of this 51-mile linear park that starts in Canoga Park and goes all the way through the city down to Long Beach.
Oh my gosh!
Our portion of it in the San Fernando Valley is the headwater starts in my district at Canoga Park High School. We put in bike lanes there, and we're continuing that so that we will ultimately have a continuous bike lane throughout my entire district. I'm talking a lot about, because I know we only have a few minutes, but there's all these great things are happening. And I would urge you or anyone who's interested to check out my website, because you can see a lot of that. You can learn about these projects as well as so much more that we're working on.
Bob,
and I haven't even talked about the citywide legislation that I'm working on.
Well, we're going to have you come back. There's no doubt about that. Tell our audience how to find your website.
Sure. www.blumenfield.lacity.org.
And we'll make sure, too, when our show goes out to our audience, that information will also be on the introduction to you. Because I want our audience to know they've got a mural project, Goodness in Reseda, on Sherman Way, Tampa Avenue. I'm just looking at a bit of a list here on Van Owen, and I haven't had a chance to see those murals. I know that I was really interested in the painting of the utility boxes in Winnetka with some history. I thought, what a great idea, because you have those utility boxes all over our communities that are kind of a funny looking green from different carriers. I love the movie theater work that you're doing in Canoga Park and the Reseda Rising. Bob, I can't tell you, I am so excited about what you have been doing. The district can never lose you. You have to remain, as a council member forever.
Well, as much as I might love to do that, there is this thing called term limits. So
when's it up?
I'm out in 2.5 years. Whether I like it or not, I will no longer be the council member for this area because of term limits.
Well, you better get busy, and I would love to have you back on the captain's table next year to hear about some of your accomplishments and learn more about what's going on in your district. I've really enjoyed talking with you, Bob, and I'm sorry that we're out of time, but everyone can find Bob Blumenfield on the website. We'll make sure that's listed on our show. And don't forget to follow us, the Captain's Table, on our Facebook page and YouTube. And Bob, thank you so much So good to talk with you today.
Thank you. I really appreciate the time. I'm always happy to come back, and have a great day.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a great day. Bye-bye.